Welcome to Interaction Design Part 3. This video continues to advance our understanding of design principles, guidelines, and heuristics to address the question of how these can impact the ways in which technologies are built, particularly user interfaces, by those who design interactive technologies. To begin, as we discussed previously, heuristics may be used by expert designers who have a deep understanding of them to inspect an interface for potential usability issues, as well as by designers to try to prevent potential usability issues. Guidelines are typically thought of from an organizational or platform-based perspective of a technological ecosystem as rules of thumb for design, some of which may be required by that organization or platform owner. And meanwhile, principles are widely applicable, more generalized design ideas that can provide a general sense of guidance for interactions. So now, let us take a look at examples to help understand how these may be used in practice, as well as some commonalities and differences between their usages. Again, with the caveat that some folks use these terms in different ways than others, and this is really my conceptualization of how these are different based on my understanding of these concepts. Let's begin with a simple design principle. There's a concept in psychology, part of what we call Gestalt theory. And that's the idea that items which are close in space to one another have some type of relationship between them. This is something called proximity. It is often applied to groups of items, but it isn't just relatedness that's conveyed, but there's a second implication, which is that further away items, ones that are less proximate to others, are somehow different or unrelated than those which are in close proximity. Now, with that example in mind, we can see that design principles are both predictive and prescriptive. Predictive in that a theory that's been tested, it's a theory that's been tested and we can predict how using this in a design will work. It is prescriptive in that we can use this to relate or separate the identities or functionalities of design elements. Meanwhile, a design guideline would be an organization or technology platform's rule, maybe even hard requirement that tells one which shapes design elements should be, as well as exactly their size when in use for a particular purpose. And this may even include, in this example anyways, how close or far away items should be to communicate that sense of proximity to the user. So in this sense, design guidelines are prescriptive, like principles are, but also descriptive in that they, guide the designer, provide clear instruction about how they should or have to apply a particular item. Now, as we said earlier, heuristics are well-established, proven guidelines. They transcend any one particular organization or source's instructions about how to design, and they are deeply informed by tried and true design principles. So in a sense, heuristics draw on the best of both principles and guidelines. Nielsen's 10 usability heuristics are the best known heuristics when it comes to interaction design. One of his heuristics is error prevention, which is to implement mindful design approaches to keep users from making slips, that is, unconscious errors despite understanding the interface, or mistakes, an error from misunderstanding the interface. One common way to do this is by using proximity to separate, to differentiate the least common or most unlikely option in a dialog box, as we have here. Or there's also the heuristic of recognition over recall, the idea that it is faster, easier, and less likely to cause a user slip when users can recognize what to do next rather than trying to recall something. For example, here, The check mark, the X, and the arrow icons are easier to recognize than having to recall what the accompanying text means. I'd also go so far as to say that I've hit another heuristic here, which is match between the system and the real world, because the icons match our commonly associated actions of yes, no, and that-a-way. Now, returning, let's look at design principles again, and there's all sorts of theories and design principles that are centered on color, often having to do with visual appeal, but also things like persuasion or calls to action. There are also principles of applying color based on their associated cultural meanings. So one might use the principle of symbolic color to emphasize and enhance a design, to perhaps further aid in promotion of recognition over recall, or to promote aesthetic and minimalist design, which is another heuristic of Jacob Nielsen's. Other design principles may give us additional insight, such as the use of cool as opposed to warm colors to enhance visual appeal, or how we might color code icons to further increase their meaning. Applying these to a design can be done mindfully, especially if there's already an existing platform, by referring to the design guidelines as a way to help guide the way in which these designs are then applied. And as referenced earlier, we can further utilize heuristics not only to inform design ideas in a way similar to principles, but also to inspect our designs to ensure that they follow heuristics. And this design is okay, but it certainly could be improved based on my deep understanding of the usability heuristics. For example, here I could further enhance the aesthetics of this design and also show that these icons and text are together. In fact, buttons. I've extended the boxes and added some drop shadows to communicate the fact that the user can, in fact, click on these. I've more clearly made them affordances, which also draws on Nielsen's heuristic of match between the system and the real world. I'm even going to go one step further and add help and documentation to my dialog box through an icon here. So heuristics in this way can be seen as prescriptive, what should work, as well as descriptive. There's a lot of examples and guidance on how to use them, and evaluative in the sense that someone who is very familiar with heuristics can utilize them to assess usability, or at the very least provide a ballpark sense of how usable a design is or not. And don't forget, we started this off with the principle of proximity, which we can still see here quite clearly, even if we remove or reduce the rest of the design. Now, in the final video of this series, we'll wrap up by considering the ways in which how we design user interfaces relates to that overarching model of information systems that we've learned about in other courses, that is, the system development lifecycle, as well as alternative approaches to designing systems with a focus on people. So get ready and stay tuned.